live. Okay, let's take it 1 second. We'll do a proper introduction. We're going to get started about one of the most important topics that nobody's really talking about today, the way that we need to talk about it. And let me just make sure we're good to go. So if somebody on the Zoom could pop over to Facebook, one of my more tech savvy folks. Hey, Christy, I see you on here. Linda, could you guys go over and just make sure we're good to go on Facebook Live and that you can hear me okay? I see myself moving around. Hey, Joan. Okay, awesome. I got lots of windows going on. So tell me you can hear me, and then we're going to just get rolling. So we are in my personal Facebook page. This is a brand new experience for me. Usually, awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up. We're all good. Usually, let me just give a preface to this. I am a health coach, educator, and mentor. I spend 99.9% of my time educating health coaches about how to help other people around the world with their health and optimizing everything they can about their health with 7 essentials. And today, you know, maybe the 8th essential might be boundaries. Maybe it's going to be brain health. We don't know. So we'll see what comes next year for the Institute for Functional Health Coaching. So today, I am so honored and so privileged, and I'm going to read this because I don't want to mess it up, to introduce Kaka Ray. She is a nationally known practitioner based in Nashville, Tennessee, providing education, therapy, and consulting in situations demanding effective crisis management. By working closely with industry-leading visionaries, she has developed an efficient approach to an array of client issues, from cutting-edge techniques utilizing brain-based science and intensive therapy to organization-wide seminars and consulting. Kaka identifies core challenges and provides distinct pathways through the implementation of brain spotting, which I love. If you know me, you know I've been doing it, and neurofeedback, which I also love, treatments for client resolution and success. In 2017, Kaka launched Tennessee Neurofeedback, a cutting-edge brain therapy clinic that improves brain function. And Kaka's mission is really to return her clients to optimal functioning by quickly minimizing psychological stress, reducing emotional barriers, addressing unresolved trauma, and identifying unhealthy influences with the treatment process. That's a mouthful. And if you're new to brain health, trust me when I tell you, this is all going to be something that you're going to remember as we go into this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kaka. I am so excited to have you. And just for the world to know, I'm a huge believer in therapy. This is my personal therapist that I want her to move in, but she won't. So this is the best that we can do. Thanks for being with us today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I wish I could see everybody out there. I just see numbers, but hey to everybody.
Yes. All right. So let's get started. And I'm just going to let you go right into the topic. What is neurofeedback? Give us a little bit of, give us some education on this topic.
Okay. If I can back up just a little bit to tell you how I arrived at it, because there's some good resources. If y'all have your pens and paper out, most of y'all are probably more savvy than I am. You can type it into your computers too. But I was gonna give you a little bit of the pathway of how I got to neurofeedback.
Absolutely.
And can you hear me okay, Carmen?
You're good. And just as a heads up, everybody, this is this process, this is going to be recorded. It is going to live on my Facebook page, my personal page. I will be sharing this in a replay with email and all across my groups. So please don't worry if you miss any important pieces. You can replay it and listen to it again. So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to give you a lot of terminology. Carmen, you tell me to move on if it starts to bog down. But my license, and as I tell you terminology like license, certification, things like that, I know Carmen and I are both about being legit and protecting the fields that we live in as far as integrity of the field. So my license is in marriage and family therapy, which means that I've been trained to look at family systems or really any interpersonal system. So where I look is the white space between people typically, and also within somebody with their brains, between their emotional, science, gut, all the stuff y'all look at too. So as a marriage and family therapist, when I went through school, all we did was really talk therapy. And that changed in our field and has moved forward at the speed of light because of all the technology that we have now to actually look at the brain. The brain is really, up until now, has been the only organ that Western medicine treats without looking at. You know, we have x-rays, we have, well, y'all know that. So what we are able to do now is actually look at the brain. So about 6 years ago, I was exposed to a a new brain-based treatment. It's called brain spotting. And many of y'all have probably heard of EMDR. And this is brain spotting is the next generation, I would say, of EMDR. We have the sounds that are bilateral that you put in someone's ear, but also we find eye position that corresponds to the trauma in the brain. And I'll give you a little bit of brain science in a minute. So I trained with David Grand. That's another name that you'll want to write down and look at his material. He's actually the developer of brain spotting, has a fascinating story of how he developed it with an Olympic skater who couldn't come out of a triple toe loop. She would pop out too soon every time. And he realized when she locked in on his finger one day in therapy, she processed at a much deeper level. So he knew there was a correlation between eye position and where the trauma was located, the ocular nerve, where the trauma was located in the brain. So I trained with him and we brought that to Nashville. Several of us are master trained, and it's really gone mainstream here in Nashville, which we're thrilled about because people are getting deep brain care. Along that same time frame, I trained with Brene Brown. And if you haven't seen Brene's TED Talk or read her stuff, she's a social worker out of Houston, and I'm just seeing what you're writing. I got distracted. Sorry.
Yeah.
He researched shame, and what we know now from brain sciences, and this is important to note, we don't grade trauma, and even shame affects the neurology of the brain like physical abuse does. So she has the fourth most watched TED Talk. It might even be higher on the list now, but get your hands on that. There's 2 TED Talks. If you haven't seen them, watch those. So I trained with her, still moving towards more brain-based stuff. And then about 2 years ago, and the funny story is I wanted to write off a trip to New York to see my son, and a guy named Dr. Basil Vanderkolk was training up there. If you don't know his work, grab his book, The Body Keeps the Score. He developed the PTSD diagnosis and really is the world leader in what trauma does to the brain. So I went to his training, and he probably 100 times in the 8 hours I was there mentioned neurofeedback. And what his research shows is this, if you couple neurofeedback with the power therapies, which would be brain spotting or EMDR, and sometimes deep hypnosis, if the practitioner knows how to really do that. But if you couple the two, you get exponential results. He would say we can get close to curative on that. I'm not Basil Vanderkolk, so I don't say that, but we are seeing that within our clinic of how people are really moving from symptomology to regulation. So any questions on that, Carmen, that we land on neurofeedback?
No, I will say though that one of the reasons, and let me just say this, when I was looking for a therapist, because I told KK at first, I said, I'm a therapy hopper. If you're not a challenge for me, I'm going to move on because of how full my brain is of education and knowledge. And as we were talking, I don't know if you remember this, but I was like, well, I've read The Body Keeps the Score and Candace Pert, and I've met, Brene Brown, and you and I were talking, you said, oh, you've met your match, right? Do you remember that? And one of the reasons I was so impressed with you is because I was able to have these conversations with you about these people that are leading us in this space. So with that said, you guys, when she mentions these names, you need to pay attention to them. They're really, they're cutting edge, truly.
Yeah. The one thing I'll go back and mention as far as things to read is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. It's called the ACEs study. If you have not been exposed to that, it will rock your world. The lady, and I can't pull her name right this second, you may know it, Carmen, when she did her research on that, she's also done a TED Talk. She's got a book, and it will rock your world too, of what you've been through in adversity and what you want to protect your kids, or at least be aware of what they're going through. And it's a very quick checklist that you can see, but it's the first longitudinal study. And she would say it's our next biggest health crisis is adverse childhood experiences. So that's also an important thing to put on your reading list. And Carmen, I bet we can pop up all 4 or 5 of those things that I've mentioned. But
yeah. And I think it's Donna something like she wrote a book, or maybe she wrote the book Childhood Disrupted or something like that. But it's Fascinating.
It's a double name. Okay, so I'm going to just try to get my hand in the camera and show y'all how I use the brain. And this little bit part of and I'm going to put this video up on Facebook soon. I use this, I filmed it the other day. But this, if you get nothing out of today, use this. I didn't come up with it myself. I wish I had another person. Dan Siegel, the whole brain child, is another. He's great with children's trauma, and he did come up with this. So if you look at my hand, can you see it okay, Carmen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. If we look at brain anatomy, the neocortical part of the brain is where what part of the brain humans have that no other animal or organism has. All right, so this is where we think, this is where we have empathy, this is where we're reasoning, all of the executive functioning is here. When you went underneath there, down, and this is the brainstem part of and a little bit above, down here is where we hold all of our trauma. And let's define today trauma as an unprocessed negative experience, because again, we don't know what one person will kick over into trauma and another person may be resilient.
Right.
But so what happens when the brain stores the memory, it actually labels the memory, I should say, and the body holds the memory. So whatever's in here is also being held in your body. So for instance, if I ask you, you might come in, Carmen, and say, I'm really upset. And I would say, how do you know you're upset? And you would say, my throat hurts, or my chest hurts, or my gut is hurting. Or I want to run out of the room. And so that's how we know our emotions, is because we're labeling what our body is feeling. Very important. And what we know is most of that stuff happens in the gut. And I'm sure you talk about this all the time. You know, we take serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but all this for our brain, but all the serotonin's made in our gut, 85% or something. Okay, so here's what happens. When we have an incoming negative experience or something that reminds the negative experience that's being held, and this can go all the way back. There's a new study out of Tulane that they've proven that the stress of a mom, even pre-pregnancy, can predispose the kid to having a stressful adulthood. So, and then, you know, that's DNA changing kind of stuff. And then during pregnancy, crisis pregnancy type stuff, and on and on. So what happens is when this part of the brain feels or remembers something that has been stored down here, our lids flip. So then we become reptilian or mammalian. And so what we want to do is recognize that. Primarily, we have 12 feet of electromagnetic waves around each person. So used to, we thought it was voodoo, new age, when we could say, well, that person is giving off that they're really mad when they walk in the room. Well, the truth is we can feel it, and it does affect us. So all that to say, when our lids flip, the other person's lid can flip. And those of you that are in close relationships know this. You know, if your husband comes in mad, then you're going to get mad back. And then I say we're in I don't use the nicest words, but we're in a fighting match between two cobras, or, you know, a cobra and a zebra, whatever. So, and the other thing to note here is there's no governor here. There's no regulation. When we're in fight, flight, and freeze, when this flips, we are in PTSD-like behavior, and it's 0 to 100. So we're either fighting at 100 miles an hour, or we're running at 100 miles an hour, or we've frozen totally. Okay. So any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay.
Perfect explanation.
Okay. So what happened then about 2 years ago when Basil Vanderkolk started talking about neurofeedback, I came home, bought all the equipment before I knew anything to do. So I tend to do things a little backwards. So then we've spent, you know, we're up and running. I've had the clinic up and running about a year now. So a lot of the things that we have are anecdotal within our clinic, but also a lot of research. So I'm going to try to run through my PowerPoint if I can. Now we're going into a phase of just neurofeedback, just so y'all know. And if you have any questions before the neurofeedback, just let us know.
Yeah. And put them in the Q&A, you guys. If you're on the webinar with us right now, put them in the Q&A. If you are on the Facebook page, I'm watching the Facebook page as well. Hi, Sylvia and Christina and Danielle. Put your questions in the comments. I'll return to that in a minute. And hold on a minute. I've lost volume with you. Hold on. Okay. Go ahead and say something, KK. Let me make sure I'm dialed in.
Okay, test.
Yep, you're good. You're good. Yeah, it just cut out, but we're good. But we will get to questions. So if you're on Facebook only and you're not in the on the webinar, it's okay. I'll go back and check. So keep your questions coming.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up PowerPoint, Carmen.
Yep. All right, we're going to do this. We're going to do it. We're going to share the screen.
All right. And now we're going to, I'm on shared screen.
Okay. Remember to pick that one folder up in the top left-hand side.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, perfect. If you'll want to expand that screen a little bit, then we'll get a bigger picture and everybody can see.
How's that?
Much better. Perfect. Okay. Yep.
All good?
Yep.
Okay. So neurofeedback has several different names: psychophysiology, neurotherapy, neurofeedback, EEG, biofeedback. So those are all interchangeable terms. We'll keep going. So when those terms combine psychology, neurology, and endocrinology, which you as coaches, I'm sure Carmen is working with y'all on combining all of those things when you're looking at a whole body person.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what is neurofeedback or neurotherapy? It is a type of biofeedback, but it is the ultimate because what we're doing is changing the brain, which changes so much stuff. It's natural. The brain wants to heal itself. And when it begins to feel what healthy is, it restores itself to high functioning. So we're looking at electricity of the brain, and we're going to use terminology like regulation and dysregulation. So what we're looking at is electrical waves, and I'm not going to get deep in the science. We have Dr. Adriana Steffens that if you guys want more on the science, and this is her PowerPoint, we can certainly get her on a Facebook Live with you too.
Love that. I get to meet her on Monday, I think.
Yeah, for sure. That'll be good. Okay, so neurofeedback is not new. It actually started back, people think it's new because we're just now getting it into clinical. It's been in research for years and years. A guy started figuring it out on cats. Carmen, you won't like this. They would induce seizures in cats and then do neurofeedback on it and could tell it was regulating the cats. So then fast forward up to NASA figuring out that they were having astronauts on, in space having seizures, and figured out that they could get rid of the seizures from neurofeedback, and it ended up being the toxicity of the rocket fuel that was.
Wow.
So one of the things that neurofeedback can help with is toxicity in the body. Then we have a guy, Joel Lubar. He actually was at the University of Tennessee, but did his research at UCLA, and he figured out a protocol where he could actually cure ADHD. One of the reasons you guys are probably going, why haven't I heard this, is that pharma companies have actually been fined for squelching the research. But there's 130,000 published research articles out there on the efficacy of neurofeedback. Okay, so one of the things we know is we can also treat addiction very successfully, and Manager Clinic did that with alcoholics and figured out they weren't relapsing, and also that's where PTSD came about. Down at the bottom of this bullet point, Dr. Steffens did the study. She's our clinical director. She had 119 people come in that were active alcoholics, and after 20 sessions, only 2% of them, 72% of them, 72% success rate, and 2% relapse over 4 years.
That's amazing.
If you think about going into an inpatient clinic, they've got 85% relapse after 90 days of inpatient, and we can really get people with, especially the combination of the deep brain power therapies and that. Okay. veterans, we're getting their PTSD down. I'm going to run through this fast because this isn't my PowerPoint. And I want to make sure we have time for.
That's okay. I do want to make sure we return to ADHD as a topic and PTSD for veterans as well, because this is a military community. So this is, yeah, absolutely.
We'll get back there for sure. Okay, so here's some of the things that that we can affect, where the genesis of them: genetics, birth trauma. We've talked about this. Physical injury. We see a lot of head injuries. One thing, and the QEEG, which is also the brain map, and I'll talk about the differences in what we're doing here in a second. But a kid, most head injuries happen between 0 and 2 to a child, and we tend to think it's when they're playing football or doing sports and stuff, but a lot of kids have head injuries before that. And most of the time they're subconcussive. So we're not even aware of them. Okay. Now, some of y'all are probably old enough to remember when we did not believe the brain could change or regrow neurons. We have totally disproved that. And now that's one of the coolest things. We have what the brain, what we call plasticity of the brain. And that just means the brain's ability to regulate itself and heal itself.
And it's also called neuroplasticity. Is that correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. Okay. I'm going to skip this real quick, but basically this just tells us when we're looking at a brain, what happens in different regions of the brain. So we're going to jump into what a brain map is. That's a lay term for a QEEG. So many of you probably know an EKG is this checking your heart's electricity. EEG is your brain electricity. And so that's the first step of the neurofeedback process. And that is that we come in and we do the measurements of your brain. There's several ways that brains are scanned. One is a PET scan. PET scans inject radioactive dye into a brain. And so it's obviously very expensive and also has side effects. Another way it's done is a SPECT, single photo emissions tomography. If you've ever heard of the Amen Clinic, that's what they use. It also is invasive and injects dyes into the brain. But something real important to note over here. Can y'all see my pointer?
Yep.
When I do that. Okay, if you look at these top two brains, this is a picture of the brain looking from the top down. This is the underneath of the brain. Then jump over here. This is a 38-year-old man that's 17 years of heavy weekend drinking. And this is what his brain looks like. It's craters in it after those 17 years. So actually, alcohol, as we know, is a toxin, especially when it's used frequently. It definitely kills the brain. But what we're doing is what we call a QEEG. And the QEEG is a cap that measures 19 points on the brain. And we know where those what correlates with those different brain positions. I've got my dog walking in and I'm just going to shut the door real quick. Sorry.
Okay. That's all right.
Okay, so the equipment so those are the different points that we measure, and that the way we measure that is we put this pretty little cap on the patient, and they sit there and do nothing but half of it. They have their eyes open, the other half eyes closed.
It's torture. Sitting there with your eyes open is torture. When you're a busy person and you actually get to sit still for 10 minutes, the last thing you want to do is keep your eyes open.
Yeah. And if you fall asleep, that's okay. A lot of times people do.
Yeah.
This is what the brain map or the QEEG looks like when it goes through. We read your map, do your EEG, we put it in a database, and it's normed, and that's why it's called it has a Q in front of it. It's normed against a population of your age and gender. And so with that, there's, it gives us a lot of information, and there's all kinds of combinations, and Dr. Steffens is our EEG expert, and she's able to even look at the combinations and tell us a lot of stuff about the map. What's interesting about this map, if we look at just, and they're broken into waves. If you guys see this, it's delta, theta, alpha, and beta. We don't really look at the high beta because most of all electrical stuff with our brain happens in these first 4 waves. These just, you don't get too confused about it, but these are just telling us the different speeds. And with the different speeds or different bands, different activities happen. So in the delta, that's typically sleep. It's a very slow wave. And so one thing that's interesting when we're talking about ADHD, kids with true ADHD have a lot more delta waves than they should. So beta is the active learning, and it's the opposite for them. They have two, when they're thinking, their delta waves go up, their beta waves go down, which is just the opposite. So they're literally, in that foggy state trying to learn something. It makes perfect sense that they can't. It's not that they can't sit still or something. But over here, if you see this, if y'all can see it, the T3 and T4 locations, when those are lit up, green is normal, and you can see the little markers on the side. What we look for is what's in normal range. High and very high doesn't mean that's better. It just means it's outside the normal range, either lower or higher here. But the T3 and T4 is an indicative pattern of a brain trauma, brain injury. And the reason is, if you know how the skull is, your brain sits kind of in a saddle, and the saddle is there at your earlobes, the underneath. And when your brain gets jostled, that's where it hits the bony part of our skull and shears neurons there. And that location is where a lot of emotional regulation happens. So you can see why somebody that has a TBI all of a sudden is very angry or has impulse control kind of stuff.
TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're able to see what
you've got messages. You might want to quit your messages.
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay. I just don't want you to have anything pop up that shouldn't.
Now, this is one thing you guys as coaches, the dominant frequency, will really be interested in, because here is where we can have suggestions for what's going on physiologically with somebody. So you can see things from what might appear to be gluten intolerance to metal toxicity. This is where things like fibromyalgia or Lyme's disease, some things, it's not that we diagnose those, but that's where you would see those things and say, okay, we might want you to go see your practitioner because there's something physiologically going on and not, neurologically. Another thing we look at is interconnectivity. And what we know now from research, how autism is now considered as similar to ADD. We're just going to throw a label on a kid and, decide they're autistic. But this is actually indicative when you see hyperconnectivity, where they're red, when the brain is talking, the right side of the brain is talking too much to the left side of the brain, that's indicative of autism. And Dr. Steffens has a case that she had a kid that was diagnosed with autism. He did the 40 sessions of neurofeedback and went to a different testing place, and they found no indicators of autism. A lot of times what you see is sensory processing issues. The kid is not autistic at all. He just can't process sensory stuff, which neurofeedback can actually help grow those new neurons and get that back.
So like textures of food and things like loud noises, those kinds of sensory processing.
Touching, weird clothing, feeling. Yes, any sensory things that come in, you just can't. You get reactive to it because you can't tolerate it. Okay, so. This is also what the QEEG looks like. Neurophysiology or neuropsychology doesn't talk in the terms I do, but here under arousal would be somebody that is depressed, and these would be the symptoms that we see. This is the client's report, what they say is happening, and this is what the brain EEG says. So we can look at the different symptoms that they're having and see how much depression they have within the brain, and then the behaviors that follow that. Now, one thing that you guys would want to write down too is we always look at causality over symptomology. Too much in the Western world, we treat symptoms and instead of causes. And this goes across the whole gamut, so
Yep.
instead of saying, why is that kid, that kid is bad, we need to say what happened to that kid.
Yes.
So anyway, inhibited are people that withdraw, or we could also say sweep things under the rug. One thing I like to say is anything that's swept under the rug gets tripped over. But this is the man that is taught, and it actually changes his brain. He's taught not to cry. That changes his brain neurology. And so when you're trying to connect with somebody emotionally, and that happens a lot, I'm gender biased on this, but when men withdraw or men shut down, you'll see this light up. This will be all the way over here, because they'll just withdraw. And if you're the other person on the other end of that withdrawal, that can also change your neurophysiology, because it hits the same pain center as a physical blow. That, shame, and rejection all do, abandonment, all those things will affect you, the other person on the other end of an inhibited personality. Okay, over-arousal is anxiety, and that's basically just when the brain is on fire. So let's see what else we've got. All right. So what we know, this is good for educators, because what we know is a lot of times kids that are adults that have actual executive processing, memory processing, it's because their brain is not regulated. It's not that they don't have a high IQ. It's just that it's not working right. So just this week, we had a kid that had been diagnosed as ADHD. She showed poor visual processing, took her to the ophthalmologist. She had double vision. She doesn't have ADD at all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, okay. So the other things it'll show, because of the patient's report, this doesn't come from the brain map, but they'll do some questionnaires, and we can put it through and compare it to what's going on with the brain. But based on their report, you can have this go back to the practitioner and say, hey, look at, see what's going on with their thyroid, see what's going on with their liver, etc. So that's a real helpful part of the brain map. The other thing that you guys will be really interested in, that based on what's going on with the brain map, we can suggest supplements, minerals, vitamins, different hormones, those kind of things. And that's really helpful. And I'm sure you guys know how much the omega-3s help the brain. It's on power, it's the food for the brain to be able to change. So when someone's doing neurofeedback, we really suggest that.
So can I clarify? I want to do a little bit of clarity here for everybody that's listening is, so what we're talking about right now is the precursor to the actual treatment of the neurofeedback or any of the other therapies that complement the neurofeedback. This is the brain mapping. This is a process to find out what is actually happening within the brain. This is a scan that is done prior to actually starting the neurofeedback. So this is something that needs to be done before you even begin the therapy, or because you don't really know what to expect. So the follow-up brain mapping is going to show how the neurofeedback actually affected the brain and how you progress and what's going on. So I just wanted to clarify that this is not even the neurofeedback process. It is just the precursor to that, which is the brain mapping process.
Absolutely. And just, and notice too, and I'll talk about this later too, if you ask, but insurance typically pays for a brain map because it's a medical process. And so you as coaches could really benefit from having this information with your clients. Mm-hmm. Because it'll give you a lot of stuff. So yes, thank you for clarifying that. So this is the first part, the QEEG, or we call it a brain map, because what the brain map does after it compares is it gives us a protocol of how we're going to train your brain. And that's where we'll go into the next set of this is neurofeedback. Once we get the protocol, and it is just classical conditioning, and really at its finest, because what it's doing is teaching the brain how to, with a feedback tone, when the brain gets measured and hits the right spot, everything's measurement, nothing is invasive. But when you're sitting there and you're listening to music and we're measuring your brain waves, and when the brain wave gets to the right spot, you get a feedback tone, ding. It just dings, and your brain goes, oh, that feels good. That feels more regulated because it wants to move towards healing, wants to move towards homeostasis. So think of it as training for a marathon, but once it finds that regulation, um, it's more like riding a bike. And we've got studies now 30 to 40 years out. If you keep the healthy lifestyle, your brain holds. So that's different than medication, obviously, because we're actually changing the brain.
Yep.
A training lasts about 30 minutes. You're in and out. Typically, we ask for you to allow for an hour. Research shows 40 to 60 sessions is what you need for your brain to hold. And um, people will start feeling better 10 to 15 sessions in. We ask that you come at least 2 times a week. But we've had great results. If you're from out of town, people come and do up to 3 times a day, and it's still holding. We've got somebody that came in and did that for a week, and we remapped him 6 months later, and he was still holding the change.
That's amazing.
So after 20 sessions, you come back and we map you again. And this is what Carmen's talking about to see the change. And you can see this is the map I showed you before, that there was a brain injury. And after 20 sessions, we changed that to green. So that concussion is healed. And just anecdotally, my daughter-in-law remembered a soccer. She had her T3 and T4 were both at yellow, and she remembered a soccer concussion, and then put it together that she began to have the onset of what they thought was ADHD after that concussion. So she was here for 6 weeks this summer and did a lot of neurofeedback. We remapped her, and it's gone, and the ability for her to focus now has gone through the roof. It's been really cool to see that. Okay, so some of the things that we can treat, you guys can read this, but for a long time I thought it was, too good to be true. But when you think of it, it helps these things because all of these things are dysregulation of the brain. So what neurofeedback does is re-regulates the brain. Let's see. Difference between neurotherapy and medication. Neurotherapy, there are no side effects. It's obviously non-invasive, cost-effective. The studies show that the cost balances out 3 to 5 years of medicine. And obviously it holds no bills, no diets, although no pills, no diets. We also ask that you eat healthy. And Carmen, you may talk about this too, but we love the higher fat, low carb diets, high healthy fat, because that's what your brain's made out of.
Yep.
Okay, all y'all know that medication you have to continue to take. Side effects. One thing to remember on side effects: none of these psychotropic drugs have been studied long term. Number one, and number two, they've never been studied in conjunction with each other. So when we have people on a cocktail, I had a guy come in the other day that was on 4 different psychotropic medications, and they're reacting to each other. So we don't know what that's doing to him, and he was feeling terrible and being treated, just getting worse. So we know that we don't have research how they all work together either. So one, and we can jump back into the ADD stuff here, Carmen, but the American Pediatric Association says that neurofeedback is level 1 best practice. So that means it is the first line that you should go to. And you don't know that because, again, so many practitioners are paid by pharma companies, and so that research doesn't come forward. But by and large, what we're seeing is that kids have the symptoms of ADHD, but a brain map shows that it's actually anxiety and not ADD. So when you think about that, you've got a kid that's already having trouble sitting still and focusing and things, and then we're putting a stimulant into his system, so we're actually jacking him up even more. So what we want to do is the brain map, the QEEG, is the only FDA approved diagnostic test. So typically, if you guys have kids that have ADD, it's just a checklist. It's a subjective test checklist. So you medicate because the symptoms are there, but in reality, the symptoms are anxiety and depression and not ADD. So about 85% of the kids that are on stimulants don't have ADD. They actually have the anxiety and depression. The other thing that happens is when they turn 18, they don't like how it's made them feel for so long. They get off of those stimulants, and then you have a real high correlation with deviant behavior once they're hitting 18. So, so that's really the important thing to note about ADHD is that let's look at the underlying anxiety and depression first.
Yeah. Do you, let me ask you a question. Do you notice that? So when kids hit that age where they, maybe start to have a voice for what they feel in their body and what they want for themselves as they get on, more independent, do you see that they are moving away from those medications, but then maybe moving into something else like alcohol or drugs or behaviors that numb them from what they were not feeling in the first place?
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, we've numbed that during the most important developmental stages of the kid. And Adderall, any of the stimulants now we know are gateways to the opiate crisis. And so what we see is they'll get off of it legitimately or start selling it to each other, snorting it, taking the regular dose and adding to it. But yeah, there's a real high correlation to incarcerated kids because of, they're just way over medicated.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, totally makes sense. I mean, you can't, the way you think about it is just, you say, causality over symptomology. And when I teach my coaches, I always say, a diagnosis is a symptom. They're being diagnosed with a symptom, irritable bowel. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to comment about because the gut is the second brain. But when someone says, well, your bowel is irritable and you're like, well, I just told you my bowels are irritable. Well, that's your diagnosis. No, it's not. What's the reason it's happening?
Exactly.
How do we get to the cause or the trigger or the reason that I'm dealing with the symptom of this?
Exactly. And
yes.
that's the whole shift that I like. And your therapist needs to be, if you're in therapy, you need to push your therapist to quit talking about, how you're behaving and ask why you're behaving that way.
Yeah, you're the queen of that. You are the queen of that. You always bring me back around, which I love. Yeah. And, and I always tell my students and everyone in all my classes, everyone needs a KK. Everyone needs one of her. I wish I could duplicate you or quadruple you.
We've never figured out how to scale KK. That's for sure.
No.
I'd love to figure that out.
Yeah, me too. I'm in the same boat. I'm like, I need 5 more. Yeah. So, okay. So let's get to it. Can we get to a couple questions as we go?
Yes, I would love, I'm pretty much done with this presentation. So I'm going to try to figure out how to get out of this.
Okay. So go back to where I said, stop screen share, remember? And you said, yeah, there's a bunch of questions coming through. It's if you just stop there, it should be in that green folder, either on the bottom, I think. You know what I'm talking about on your Zoom on your Zoom screen. Yeah. And then, yeah. Okay. I think you did something. You closed some windows. There we go. Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So first question from Carrie. I need to get some of this for myself. Where do I find a reputable practitioner, or can I come to Nashville?
Yes. And the answer is thank you for asking that. Very important. This field is not regulated enough yet. We are pushing, we've got a bill that we're going to push towards the Tennessee legislature to begin to regulate. And also it's happening in New York. But what you want to do.
Oh, I lost volume. I don't hear you. No. It's like you put your thumb over your microphone or something.
Okay. How about that?
There you are. You're good. Yep.
Okay, sorry. BCIA, board certified neuropractitioners. It's BCIA. It doesn't stand for anything. It's a grueling process to be certified. It's not a license. So their requirement is that a licensed mental health professional is the only one that can get that certification. It's very important for the integrity of the field to follow that, because people can rent the equipment. You can even rent it for home, and it's not good. It's not helpful. You'll spend a lot of money with somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. So yes, BCIA. The other thing you can do is come to Nashville, and we can do what we call an intensive. You can do intensive with just neurofeedback, or with brain spotting and neurofeedback, and you can do it over a course of a week, and then we'll ask you to come back in about 6 weeks and do a little more. So So yeah, you can certainly do that. You can come for. We've got people coming in from Birmingham that come for 2 days at a time. So, yeah. So
Yeah. Okay. So heads up to anyone around the country. And I have people from around the world also that are my students and whatever. If you ever come to Nashville, I will come and take you to lunch or dinner or whatever. Absolutely. If you need a place to stay because you can't afford a hotel, get in touch with me. It is that important that you take care of your brain that I'm throwing that out there. And if you're living in Clarksville or Nashville or whatever, you guys, it's an easy trek for the most part, despite the traffic. But, let me go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say, we've opened up a location in Midtown where our first one is in Brentwood, and Midtown's a lot closer for you guys in Clarksville.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. And all of this information, I will be posting addresses and links and everything for everybody. We'll be sending it out with a replay. I'll be posting it in the comments after we're done today. But one thing I wanted to make sure and mention was just to kind of do a little personal plug here is that I have done DR with multiple different people to work on traumatic experiences. I've done brain spotting with 4 different people. And the only time that I've really experienced the shift to where I can now, which you've noticed, brain spot by myself without even having the pointer, which you notice. I get my eyes on something, my memory hits it, and we work on it. I have literally not been able to reproduce the traumas that we have worked on because of brain spotting and neurofeedback combined. So I just want to say personally, I've had multiple sessions and experiences and have not been able to experience the trauma that I had been through after the session. Couldn't even bring it back up, remember?
So what happens there is your brain quits thinking, and you guys in Clarksville obviously know much more about PTSD than most people, but PTSD means it's still first person current tense. And so what we're doing is taking it to third person past tense, and really it does begin to blur, and which is awesome.
It's fascinating. Okay. So Diane is asking, if I had a PET scan as a child, a couple of times I played really rough, haha, could it be affecting me now, and is it reversible?
Absolutely, on both of those. You absolutely do. You want the reversible is what is so fun to do the neurofeedback and see how, and without it, the brain changes so slowly. But there's a good chance you're having symptomology because of that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Chrissy has to listen to the rest of the replay later, but she says, please ask about treatment, timeline, procedure, how many sessions are typical, how often, et cetera. Let's recap that in a second. But can any of the sessions be done remotely? And would love to do it at an approximate cost if that's appropriate to ask.
For sure. Okay. So the answer is I would never do it remotely. People are doing it remotely, and I would love to let you talk to Dr. Stevens about the efficacy of that. It's not great. And also we want to be training the right places in your brain. And so the brain map is why we do that. And you can't do a brain map on your own. Cost wise, to do the whole thing, 40 to 60 sessions with the brain maps, you're about $4,500 in. What we've just found out, which I'm thrilled about, insurance companies are moving towards paying. And we, a year ago, nobody was, and we probably were much less savvy at how to get that done. We don't actually file your insurance, but we will get the pre-approval for you. And as a provider, we are seeing a lot better results than actually the patient trying to get that approval, because you can go around the one-time approval when there's not a provider in your area, those kind of things. So we are seeing, I saw one today that paid 90% without deductible. So there are some good insurances out there.
Yeah. And a reminder of what she said earlier is that the QEEG is usually covered by insurance because it's considered a medical testing or whatever. Right. So,
right. So that can really drop you down on your price. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So Diane says, can the brain heal itself from concussions without neurofeedback? Meaning, can time heal it?
That's a great question for Dr. Steffens, but I would say let's err on the side of no. Mm-hmm. The symptomology can go away, but just like we saw in that map, and my daughter-in-law, she had that 10 years before and it was not healing. And the repetitive hits are where you head into CTE, and we want to head those off with healing them.
Yeah. That just reminded me of Braden falling out of the tree when it was snowing. I don't know why he was in a tree when it was snowing, but he was. And he fell out. And now that you know a lot more about my kid, he came in and I said, what's wrong with you? Your face looks weird. And he was like, I have no idea. And I'm like, why is your face swollen? And he was like, I don't know. I woke up on the ground. And I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, off to the emergency room. So we're going to get him in for neurofeedback, for many reasons, but that alone just reminded me, the concussion that he had. Yeah. Okay. So Joan is asking, would a BS in psychology with an LCSW and then training specifically for neurofeedback be adequate? Or do I also need to get my master's in psychology?
Does she said LCSW?
Uh-huh.
No, she doesn't. She's good to go. She just needs to go to the BCIA website and go through their certification process. And
awesome.
It's not for the faint of heart, but there's only 700 of us in the nation. So we really need more people to go through that certification process. And
awesome.
She's welcome to email me, kk@kkray.com, and I'll shoot her some good supervisors.
Okay, perfect. All right. So Stan says, I work with lots of wrongly stimulated kids. It's a sad, unnecessary epidemic. Common denominators, an absent or poor father figure. Would you agree?
I think there's probably, if you're seeing a correlation, there probably is. I would say, I would wonder if the dysregulation is, did you say he said ADD, Carmen?
He was just saying, but different behavior problems, really.
Yeah, for sure. Because what we're looking for is attachment. Everything we want is attachment. And when there's detachment or abuse or neglect, it absolutely dysregulates a kid beyond a shadow of a doubt. We want toxicity away from that kid. So the detachment is, kind of iffy depending on the circumstances. Sometimes detachment is best as long as there is other attachment. So I don't want to get too far with that, but
right,
you absolutely are nailing it on that question. Yes.
Okay. So Linda's wondering if we could get the slides. I think since they're probably not your slides, that's probably not a doable thing, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm going to work on getting Dr. Steffens in. So, to talk to us. Yeah. And then, do you know of someone good in Central Illinois? What would be a site someone can go out and look for a general practitioner?
You can go to that BCIA website and do a search for your area for sure.
Okay. Yeah. And that link is in the chat, you guys. So grab that. And it says, if you heal the gut, can you heal the brain without neurofeedback?
That's always a great first step because, and it goes in conjunction, healing the gut is probably a lot cheaper than $5,000. So you definitely want to start there. The problem is the trauma or the unprocessed negative emotions that are held in the brain will cause that reactivity to keep going. So it's a both and, I think.
Okay. Okay. The website for KK to get an appointment, I'm going to plug this into the chat and then I'm going to throw it into the Facebook page. It's TNNF as in Frank, B as in boy.com. So TNNFB.com. And I will definitely be covering all areas, all groups, and all 8 to 10,000 people that I have on my areas, and we'll get all of this information out. Michelle says, what have you seen in regards to helping migraines and headaches?
Yeah, very good results on that, and very common dysregulation. The other thing that's common with migraines is is metal toxicity, also silicone breast implants. But we definitely can see, because that silicone absorbs into the body. So lots of correlation there, but we definitely can see on the brain map where you're having the headaches. It will show the migraines on the brain map. So yeah, we see fabulous results. People just quit getting the headaches. So
wow, that's amazing. Okay. So Linda says, I missed some of the beginning. I was driving. Did you mention the amygdala? Is that where the triggering of past memories happens?
Yeah, down deep in that limbic system for sure. We call that an amygdala hijack. So yes, you're right on. That's where the brain flips. Brain flips, and you're down in that brain stem and amygdala down deep in that limbic system. Yes.
Okay. Stan is asking, is there any procedure or guideline for getting insurance approval that you know of? VA hospital will not pay for PRT scan or SPECT or QEEG.
Right. All we can do on that, unfortunately, the Veteran Administration, and we're not taking care of you guys as vets, and that's unfortunate. Now, what I will say is we treat any individual that's been in combat, that's a veteran, at Tennessee Neurofeedback for free. Also, there's some practitioners around the country through the Wounded Warrior Project. They are treating, Camp Lejeune has a huge treatment of neurofeedback with great results. So let us try to get pre-approval for you, but also family members will treat for half price, and combat veterans we will for sure treat for free.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so my mom, anyone in the Chattanooga area, I'll help you with that. But why don't you just come stay with me for a week and then go see KK? So there's that. Yeah. And then you would go to the BCIA site, Mom, if you want to find someone. But I just recommend coming up and hanging out with me for a week. So I'll take good care of you.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So Bobby is saying, my daughter had 22 sessions when she was 15. It really didn't do much, but she's 22 now and struggling even more than she was at 15. She's been to the Amen clinic and they felt it was high functioning Asperger's. I'm searching for more help. She's had a lot of childhood trauma and health issues all her life. She cannot be independent.
Wow. Well, 5 years ago, we've got a lot more data now. The databases are a lot bigger. I'd be interested, did she have the QEEG or just do neurofeedback?
Yeah, Bobby, why don't you plug that in if you're still listening and give us a little more information about that. Yeah. And then also, don't you think, here's how I kind of think about these kinds of things. When we get a little piece of someone's story or a little bit of information about someone, my mind automatically goes out into, was she eating dyes? Was she eating gluten? What other things were happening in her life at the time that might have inhibited, healing or anything like that? I always try to see the big functioning, the person as a functioning whole, because isolating one treatment, especially for the brain, I just don't think it's doesn't make a lot of sense. You got to look at the person as a whole.
Totally. I totally agree with that. And probably a good, we have Gigi McMurray, that's functional medicine nurse practitioner in our office. And, if you need to get some of that testing done, I don't know what y'all's licensure certification allows for on that, but for sure we have that. One little thing I would say, as a brain spotter, the only way that I will see you in brain spotting is if you combine that with neurofeedback. But I have 2 other colleagues in town that have the same level of training I do that you could see just for brain spotting. You absolutely can come for neurofeedback without seeing me. Just wanted to clarify those things if you contact me.
Yeah. And I would have to say also, if she had a lot of trauma and a lot of things happening in her life, you can neurofeedback all day long, in my opinion, if you don't go after the reason the trauma happened or go after that trauma and dissipate the effects of it. I can personally speak to say that you're not going to get the same effects. The first time I ever did brain spotting and neurofeedback, I think I texted you after and I said, I don't even feel the ground under my feet. I felt like I was so much lighter, like a 2,500 pound weight had been taken off my shoulders. It was a physical feeling that I actually had.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. Okay. So Linda says, does the neurofeedback use specific frequencies for healing, or have you seen different frequencies healing different parts of the brain?
Yeah, we use a protocol that the QEEG, along with Dr. Steffen's expertise. And so it depends what's going on with the brain, what the protocol is. So think of that as a prescription. So we don't do one size fits all. People do that are out there, but Cutting Edge doesn't do that. So the protocol will train specific frequencies in specific locations, but that's based on your brain. Then after the 20 sessions, that happens all over again.
Yeah. Okay. What has been your experience with those who have experienced child sexual abuse?
Sorry.
That's okay. Someone's FaceTiming you.
Sorry.
That's okay. No worries. So childhood sexual abuse, what's your experience with those who have had that happen?
Yeah. So they typically are in the frozen state of PTSD. I would not recommend somebody just doing neurofeedback. I think it's very important with PTSD to do that in conjunction with a therapist of some kind. And you want, you can do it and calm the brain down, but I would really like to see the therapy component to get those memories, third person past tense. And we, even with brain spotting, can go way back to pre-verbal. So we've had kids that have felt they don't know what's happening, but their body releases those sexual abuse type. I would say with something that egregious to the brain, you want to do both no matter what.
Yeah. One of our sessions, we went back to the room where I was born in. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The trauma of abandonment, because my mother was ill, and I remember and all of those feelings. And it was just being born. I mean, I remember that. That was a very intense session. Very cool.
Yeah.
So Natalia is asking, my mother has severe insomnia, cannot sleep without sleep medication. What kind of results have you had with this problem? How long might it take?
Yeah. So sleep restoration is one of the first things that happens, and you begin to see that. And I don't want to, it's not a silver bullet, 7 to 8 sessions in. And as you're taking meds for that, that's also going to be tricky. You want to titrate down and all that. So you want to do that with your practitioner, but for sure, I think the actual percentage is like 95% that we can get rid of the insomnia. I'm an insomniac, and I can obviously tell when I'm not doing neurofeedback. So
I sleep like a rock after a session. And for nights afterward, I don't have a real problem sleeping, but I'd sleep so deep and hard for probably 3 or 4 nights after a session. It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's crazy. All right. Stam says, I may go to the Upperland Hotel for Christian conference. I'll be in touch with details, figure out how to tie in neurofeedback treatment in Tennessee. Awesome. And of course I will meet you. Bobby is telling us that she only had neurofeedback. She wasn't eating great, and she did have her brain mapped with the EEG. So
yeah, off of gluten for sure. High omega-3s. We want to get them off of the omega-6
right.
anything processed, because it's not going to be effective if we're not feeding the brain right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give it another try, I would say. Give it another try.
Yeah. Okay. So Maria says, can a couple do this together?
Okay, so anecdotally, that's the best thing to do, because when we're talking about the electromagnetic forces between us, my husband and I have been married 30 years, and I'd put our marriage up against any of them, but the reactivity between us has gone away. And he would say he can't even believe it. Like he's not a road rager, but sometimes he acts a fool when he's driving. And he just doesn't anymore. And I can change places we're going to eat 4 or 5 times on the way to the restaurant, and it doesn't flip him out. And so I don't change restaurants 4 or 5 times on the way. So yeah, if you've got a couple, you're both flipping your lids, and you will get amazing results. And also with kids with PTSD, I recommend the parent coming too, because the same thing is happening between the parent and the kid.
Yeah, very cool. All right. So I don't understand Diane's question. When you say both, does she mean brain mapping and neurofeedback? I'm not sure. You have to be more specific, because we've been talking for over an hour. So I'm not sure what that means when she says
both is meaning brain spotting and neurofeedback. The combination of the two.
Okay. And then Catherine's saying, how does this compare to tapping? I mean, a lot of people do EFT, as a therapy.
Yeah. And so tapping, any of those things, meditation, any of those things are awesome and great. They don't change the brain.
Right.
So that's what we're going for, is actually the neurophysiological change.
Right. My mom, should I bring gluten-free donuts? She brought me 3 dozen gluten-free donuts from Chattanooga. Let me just say, I was going to bring you some yesterday, but no, because you're not eating sugar. But let me tell you, woo, they're good. Yes. And you should bring some. So let me hop into the Facebook group here. I know there's some questions out here. Let me look real quick at what we've got going on there. And because you've been super generous with your time, we're already over the hour. So give me 1 second and see if I can.
I'm good. You're good.
Okay. So Dixie's asking, if you've had a mapping in the past few years and no treatment, can you use that mapping, or does it need to be current?
Current.
Yeah.
It needs to be current, and it's specific to our equipment.
Okay. Yeah.
Specific to our equipment and database.
Yeah. Okay. So Rebecca's asking, can brain spotting reveal damage from past head traumas in childhood and adolescence? I think we've talked a little bit about that, but I had more head injuries than I can count in my lifetime. And I wonder if that could be a part of the depression that I struggle with. That's a great question.
Absolutely. I would say take that to the bank. And that would be.
We lost your volume again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, there you are. Yep.
I don't know what happens. I think we're getting brain spotting terminology mixed up with brain map. Brain map is the QEEG. Brain spotting is the power therapy. Neurofeedback is the brain training. I hope I've made that clear. Yeah,
it's clear. So the mapping's precursor to the treatment of brain spotting with neurofeedback together. You don't always have to have brain spotting with the neurofeedback unless it's something that would be even more curative. But I think that's clear. Yeah, the hand-in-hand therapy. Actually, this question came in last night from one of my friends from the gym, and I'm not sure she could make it on today, but her question is, the couple of parts. Backstory: she has a child that was adopted at 8 years old from Ethiopia, 6 years in an orphanage with severe neglect and abuse of all kinds. He has a diagnosis of autism, low IQ, and Tourette's, but no further treatment recommendations other than speech and ABA therapy. He doesn't qualify for any special services at school. He tests high enough to barely pass by. So we basically are left hanging and trying to figure out how to help him. He has severe outbursts from anger and frustration. He's on medication, doesn't seem to help much. Guafenicin and Risperdal. Doesn't talk about Ethiopia or the abuse, but she's not sure he remembers much. She's heard about neurofeedback from other adoptive parents and is wondering if this is something that could help him and how.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, and what'll happen is that he'll begin to regulate his brain. And I would say brain spotting for sure. And a kid that age doesn't even have to talk in brain spotting. They just have to lock in with their eyes, and the therapist can check in with them, but they don't have to. And so that's helpful. Their body keeps the score, not their, So, and we have seen a whole lot of kids with that reactive attachment dysregulation thing coming from adopted situations and are having great results for sure. And I'd even question a lot of those diagnoses because those are all symptomology type things.
Totally. Yeah. Symptoms instead of diagnosis. Linda asks again, can you just summarize real quick the 3 parts of the process in just a few sentences so she can get a concrete picture of this? Example, QEEG, brain mapping, electrical impulses called. So just kind of give us like we just covered it, but let's give it a little bit more meat. And then, so she can put that. Linda's one of my Brainiac students. Like I would go to her for help because she's so smart. So let's put that in concrete.
Okay. So brain spotting, that's a whole separate category. That is a power therapy think of the traditional talk therapy, but it's very efficient and more effective because we get down in the deep part of the brain. So that's the therapeutic component, brain spotting. Mm-hmm. Then in the neurofeedback component, it's the brain map, which is also the QEEG. That's the EEG that's normed against a database. That gives us the map to do the protocol, the prescription to do the actual neurofeedback training. Van der Kolk suggests bringing the brain spotting in with the neurofeedback, the 2 modalities. So both of those are separate modalities. You bring them both in and you get the exponential results.
Okay, perfect. So looks like we only have about 2 questions left here. Tapping EFT does not change the brain, ? Meditation, ? I think meditation does, even if for a little bit, doesn't it?
Not neurologically.
Okay. So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, what we do with neurofeedback is we're actually growing new neurons. The brain is healing itself. And what you're doing with the meditation, the tapping and all that stuff is you're calming the brain down, but that's not changing the physiology of the brain. Okay. They're great in conjunction. If you know how to meditate, you can definitely meditate while you're doing neurofeedback, but it's neurofeedback is what is giving the operant conditioning and changing the brain.
Yeah, kind of like if you had a fire. So meditation is the water for the fire, but in neurofeedback is the plants coming up through the burnt ground kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that. Okay. Yeah. So last question: do you have to have a PET scan? No.
No. The QEEG is a non-invasive alternative to that.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Gosh, I think that is one last one. Helga says, my son did craniosacral therapy for post-concussion syndrome. Can that change the brain? It seemed to help him.
Yeah, I'm all about that. But you only know that if you do the EEG, the QEEG, to see if the brain is still, if it helped, it helped. But that probably actually helped blood flow to the brain. So the brain's getting more blood because it's not crimped. And we do that a lot in conjunction with chiropractors in town to get that done. But do the brain map and see if he's got a brain injury.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I think we hit it all. I think we got it all. This has been great. I love this topic. You know it. I mean, yes. I know. I could just bend your ear forever if we both had more time. But this has been really fascinating. And yes, we're getting some thank you, very educational. All I can tell you guys is this is, if you sit there and you tell yourself, well, I can't afford it. And this, can you afford to continue to age without the best health of your brain intact? And can your children continue to go through school struggling and suffering and having people that don't understand them? And but one of my best friends in the whole world, her poor son has struggled with oppositional defiance, and he's got all these labels on him, and he had a brain injury at birth. And I truly she and I've been talking about getting him up to see you, and hopefully that, that can be the case. Make it a priority. We've got to start making our children and ourselves priority when it comes to our brain health. It has to be. And you know how hard it is for me to get to, but by God, I do get there.
You do.
I make it happen. Yeah. So thank you so much, KK, for everything.
Wow, how fun. And feel free to email me questions, kk@kkray.com.
Yep.
And I'll try as best I can to get back to you. So yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'll gather questions from my coaches. I know there's going to be some blowing up in my groups and students, and maybe we'll just do this again as time goes on. We'll bring you back and all that. So yep, I'll have everybody, I'll have your information, the website, the phone numbers, the emails, the links, everything will go out, and I'll post it as the evening goes on. And just thank you so much, and God bless you. And I know I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Carmen.
All right. Thank you. Much love. Thanks, everybody. Bye.